Some photographs capture memories. Others capture moments we were never meant to keep. This is a true-style psychological horror story about a roll of film that should never have been developed. About faces that appear where no one was standing. And smiles that don't belong to the living. This is the photos where the dead smile back. Read carefully. And whatever you do, don't stare too long. Chapter 1. The photograph that should never have been developed. My photo lab sat at the very end of a narrow alley, so narrow that two people passing each other would have to turn sideways. The old sign above the door hung crooked, most of the letters peeled away, leaving only the faint outline of the words, Photo Lab, like something long forgotten. During the day, there were almost no customers. At night, there were none at all, except for those who did not want to be seen. In an age where memories live inside phones, the people who still used film always had their reasons, and I had learned one rule over the years. Never ask what those reasons are. That night, it was drizzling, not the kind of rain that pounds loudly against the streets, but the kind that smears the streetlights into watery streaks, like tears sliding down glass. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. I was about to pull down the metal shutter when the bell above the door rang. A dry, hollow clang. The man stepped inside before I could greet him. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a dark, worn coat that smelled faintly of dampness, as if he had come straight from a place where sunlight never reached. What caught my attention wasn't his face, it was his eyes. They never met mine, they never scanned the room. They stayed fixed on the floor, as if he were afraid of accidentally seeing something reflected back at him. He placed a roll of film on the counter, wrapped in old newspaper. "Please develop this," he said. His voice was hoarse, low enough to sound almost like a whisper. "Just the prints, no corrections." I nodded out of habit, but before I could ask for his name or phone number, he spoke again. If you see anything strange." He stopped, his hand tightened on the counter, his fingernails pressing pale against the wood. "Don't call me, don't ask, just finish it and leave it there." For the first time, he looked up at me. The moment sent a chill straight through my spine. Not because his eyes were angry or unhinged, but because there was absolute certainty in them. The look of someone who had already seen how his story ended and was merely walking through the remaining steps. "There are things," he said slowly, "that once you see them clearly, there's no turning back." He turned and left before I could respond. The bell rang again. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Indifferent, as if no one had entered at all. I stared at the roll of film lying motionless on the counter. No name. No date. No sign of an ordinary memory. Just an old roll of film. And I did not listen to his warning. Chapter 2. The Third Face. I didn't develop the roll of film right away. Not because I was afraid, at least. That's what I told myself. It was more a strange, lingering sensation, as if leaving it in the darkroom for too long would allow whatever was inside to reveal itself on its own, without waiting for my permission. The roll sat on the counter for nearly an hour. I turned on the fluorescent light, wiped my hands, checked the chemicals again. Everything was normal. Too normal. That was what unsettled me. Eventually, I pulled the curtain closed, shut the darkroom door, and let the darkness swallow the space. The familiar chemical smell filled the air, a scent I had breathed in for years. So long that it had become part of my memory itself. I hung the film onto the reel and began the process. The first images emerged slowly, as if they were hesitating before letting themselves be seen. The first frame, an old living room, dim yellow light, cracks running along the wall, no people. The second frame, the same room, but now a husband and wife sat on the sofa. Their faces were stiff, expressionless, like people unaccustomed to having their picture taken. The third frame, a young girl standing in front of them. Her hands held stiffly at her sides. Her eyes were turned slightly away, as if someone had just called her name from outside the frame. Up to that point, everything was normal. I moved the film into the next chemical bath. And then, in the fourth frame, I noticed something wrong. The composition was the same, the family of three, but behind them, in the upper left corner of the image, there was a mirror hanging on the wall, something I was certain had not stood out in the first three frames. Inside the mirror was a face. Not the father's. Not the mother's. Not the child's. Another face. It stood far too close to the glass. So close that only the upper half was visible, the forehead. The eyes. The mouth. Pale skin. Eyes opened wider than they should have been. And lips, curled upward. It wasn't a natural smile. It was the smile of something that knew it was being seen. I leaned closer. My heart began to pound. My mind scrambled for explanations. Light reflection. Film overlap. Chemical error. Anything reasonable. Anything that could make this normal. But what froze the blood in my veins was this. The face in the mirror was staring straight into the camera lens. Not at the family. Not at the photographer. At the person developing the photo. For the first time in my career, my hands slipped from the reel. The strip of film swayed gently in the darkness. And I had the unmistakable feeling that the smile in the mirror grew just a little wider. The moment I turned away. Chapter 3. Dead for 3 years. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the face in the mirror resurfaced. Not because it was grotesque or violent, there was no blood. No distortion, but because it should not have existed at all. It appeared in the exact place, with the exact gaze, as if it had been waiting for the moment I noticed it. The next morning, I returned to the shop earlier than usual. Daylight poured in through the front window, making everything look painfully ordinary. Too ordinary. For a moment, I wondered if I had exaggerated everything in my mind. The photographs in the darkroom had dried. I didn't look at the fourth frame. Instead, I examined the roll of film itself. Along the edge of the film canister was a faint marking, nearly scratched away. I took out a magnifying glass and leaned closer. Beneath the damage, a name appeared, written in small, careful letters. S. Haruki. The name unsettled me, though I didn't yet know why. I searched for it online, intending only to confirm that the family was real, that this was an ordinary set of photographs. The results that appeared were not what I expected. 3 years earlier, in the middle of winter, a house fire had occurred in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A family of 3 had died inside. There were no signs of forced entry. No survivors. The father's name, Sato Haruki. I read the article again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the photographs attached to the report left no room for doubt. The burned living room, the old sofa, the cracked wall. They were identical to the room in the photos. My hands went cold. Those images were not old photographs being developed late. They had been taken after the family was already dead. A thought began to form in my mind, one I didn't want to accept. If the people in the photographs were dead, then who had pressed the shutter? And whose face was reflected in the mirror? Against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I returned to the darkroom. I took out the fourth photograph and held it under the light. That was when I noticed the detail I had missed the night before. Behind the smiling face in the mirror, there was a deeper layer of darkness, as if another room existed beyond the reflection. A space that did not belong to that house. And at the edge of that darkness, there was something that looked like a hand. Not clear. Not complete. But clear enough for me to understand. This family had not taken photos with the dead. They had taken photos with something that came after death. Chapter 4. Smiles not meant for the living. I wanted to believe there was only one face. A single anomaly. A lone flaw that could be explained away by coincidence. By lighting. By exhaustion. Humans cling to explanations like that. Because once we let go of them, all that remains is raw fear. But the remaining photographs gave me no such mercy. I continued developing the role. Even though each time I lowered a print into the chemicals, my heart beat faster, as if my body understood long before my mind that I was moving closer to something I was never meant to touch. The fifth frame emerged. The family sat exactly as before. Nothing had changed, but in the window behind them, where there should have been nothing but darkness from outside, there was a faint face. Only the eyes and pale teeth were visible. The smile was unfinished, as though it hadn't fully stepped into the light yet. The sixth frame. The television across from the sofa reflected a figure standing far too close to the screen. Too close, so close I couldn't understand how it didn't block the entire image. The face leaned downward, looking at the family, yet the eyes were directed straight into the lens. My hands began to shake. By the 7th frame, I stopped counting. Faces appeared in places where no one could possibly be, in the narrow gap of a half-open door. Behind the curtain, near the ceiling where shadows gathered thickest. They didn't all look the same, but they shared one thing in common. The smile. It wasn't the smile of someone being photographed. There was no warmth, no politeness, no joy. It was the smile of something that had already crossed something, now looking back at those still trapped on the other side. That was when I noticed the pattern. The further I went into the roll, the closer the faces became. In the early frames, they were distant and blurred, standing at the edges of the world, but in the later ones, they pressed into the frame, taking up space, wedging themselves between the family members, slowly replacing the living. And then I saw what finally forced me to sink down onto the darkroom floor. In one of the last photographs, the child was no longer looking away. She was staring directly into the camera. And she was smiling. Not a child's smile, but the same smile worn by the faces in the shadows. The family was no longer the center of the photograph. They had become background. What stood behind them was what mattered now. And for the first time, a thought colder than fear settled into my mind. These smiles weren't meant for the living to see. They were smiling at each other. Chapter 5. Sounds in the Darkroom. I had worked long enough in this profession to be familiar with silence. A darkroom is never completely quiet. There is always the soft drip of water, the faint hum of the red lamp, the sound of photographic paper brushing against plastic trays. But those sounds are harmless, steady, predictable. They reassure you that everything is under control. That night, the darkroom was no longer like that. I returned to organize the photographs, even though every instinct told me to lock the door and leave. I didn't turn on the main light, relying only on the dim red glow that washed over the prints hanging along the metal line. The smiles in the photographs seemed more pronounced under that light, as if darkness were their natural environment. I was writing notes when I heard something unusual. Not loud, not clear. It sounded like a very soft exhale, right beside my ear. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs hard enough to hurt. I told myself it was imagination, exhaustion, my mind filling the silence with fear. Then it happened again. This time, I realized the sound was not coming from behind me. It was coming from in front of me. From the photographs. I stepped closer, moving slowly. The prints hung there, still damp, their surfaces reflecting the red light. I leaned my ear toward one of the images in the center, the one where the smile in the mirror was widest. And I heard it. Not clear speech, no complete words, just fragments, overlapping, as if many voices were whispering at once. Finally, someone can see. I staggered backward, crashing into the work table. A developing tray fell to the floor, liquid spilling across the tiles and soaking my shoes with cold. But the whispering didn't stop. It didn't grow louder. It didn't become urgent. It was simply there, steady, patient, as if it didn't need my reaction, only my awareness. And then something locked my entire body in place. Those sounds were not trying to communicate. They were confirming my presence. I was the first person to hear them in a very long time. And standing alone in the darkroom, surrounded by still wet photographs, I understood a truth colder than fear. These images didn't just record moments. They remembered. And now, they knew that I did too. Chapter 6. The Man Without a Photograph. I decided to turn the film and all the photographs over to the police. Not because I believed they could explain what was happening, but because I needed someone else to see them. I didn't want to be the only person carrying those smiles inside my head. The next morning, I opened the shop earlier than usual. Daylight flooded the room, erasing some of the suffocating weight of the night before. Everything looked normal, so normal that I wondered if I had imagined everything. Until I stepped into the darkroom. The hanging line was empty. There were no photographs. No damp prints. No negatives. No signs that anyone had come in to remove them. The clips still hung neatly in place, as if they had never held anything at all. I stood there for a long time, trying to piece together what had happened. The shop hadn't been broken into. Nothing was disturbed. The photographs were simply gone. On the work table, where I had left my notebook, something unfamiliar waited. A gray envelope, no name written on it. Inside was a single photograph. I recognized the man in the image immediately. It was the same man who had brought the roll of film to my shop. He stood in front of my store, in the exact spot he had stood that night. The same worn coat, the same tired expression, but something was wrong. I leaned closer. In the photograph, he had no shadow. The streetlight clearly illuminated the ground, yet beneath his feet there was nothing, no darkness, no shape, as if the light refused to acknowledge his presence. And then I saw it. In the glass of the shop door behind him, there was a reflection. Not of me, but of another version of himself. The face in the reflection was deathly pale. The eyes were wide open. The lips were pulled into a smile far wider than anything natural. It was the same smile I had seen in the missing photographs. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in unsteady handwriting, were 4 words. "You've seen them now." My throat went dry. The man hadn't left a photograph behind. He had become one. And in that moment, I understood something that stole the air from my lungs. The photographs hadn't disappeared. They had simply changed places. Chapter 7. The Camera's Curse. I didn't dare take the photograph home with me. I locked it inside the lowest drawer in the shop and sat for hours staring at the opposite wall. It felt as though the moment I looked away, whatever was inside the image would change position, not within the frame, but in the real world. I needed to know where the camera had come from. The roll of film was gone, but the type of film wasn't. I wrote down the manufacturer's code, the format, the year of production. It was a kind of film that had been discontinued long ago. Usually favored by photographers who believed cameras did more than capture images, that they preserved moments people never realized they were living through. Following that trail led me to an old online forum, a place where film photographers once discussed lost equipment. In a nearly forgotten thread, one name appeared again and again, always accompanied by unsettling comments. A war photographer. People said he could capture the moment before death, not the instant a bullet struck flesh, but the moment a person realized they no longer belonged to this world. His camera had never been recovered after he took his own life inside his darkroom. What chilled me were the rumors attached to his work. Every technician who had ever developed his film said the same thing, in the photographs. Those about to die were always smiling. Not out of happiness, but because they had seen something standing behind the photographer. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. The smiles in my photographs weren't new. They were only continuing a sequence that had begun long ago. That evening, when I returned to the shop, I noticed something else. In the corner of the darkroom, where I was certain there had been nothing before, stood an object covered with a black cloth. I did not remember bringing it in. I pulled the cloth away. An old camera lay on the table, its metal body scratched and worn, the lens unnaturally heavy in my hands. It rested there as if it had always been part of the room, simply waiting for me to notice it. Etched faintly into the body were words so worn they were almost invisible. "Do not photograph the living." I stood there for a long time. And then, whether I wanted to or not, I understood a truth even more disturbing. The camera had not found its way to me. It had been passed on. And the man who brought the roll of film to my shop had only been the most recent one in line. Chapter 8. When the photographs begin to change. I didn't touch the camera right away. It lay there, silent, covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it had existed in that room for years, even though I knew with absolute certainty that it hadn't. Every time I turned my back, I had the unsettling feeling that the lens shifted slightly, just enough to change its angle, not to take a picture, but to observe. I tried to ground myself in routine. I wiped the tables, reorganized the chemicals, wrote everything down, as if recording events could force reality to stay still. But the harder I clung to order, the more obvious the abnormality became. The photographs that had disappeared were coming back. Not all at once, not dramatically. They reappeared one by one, placed in spots I knew I had already cleared, on the work table. beside the sink, loosely clipped into my notebook. They weren't wet, they didn't smell of fresh chemicals. As if they had never left. I picked one up, the photograph where the face in the mirror had first appeared. The smile had changed. It was wider now, deeper, the creases around the mouth more pronounced, as though the face had been holding that smile for a very long time. What made my blood run cold were the eyes. They were no longer looking into the lens. They were looking to the side, toward where I was standing. I set the photograph down, my heart racing. I told myself it was the lighting, that my position in the room had changed. But when I examined the others, the truth became impossible to deny. Every face in every photograph had shifted its gaze. They no longer looked at the photographer. They no longer looked at one another. They were looking at the viewer. And then I saw the worst part. In one photograph of the living room, at the far right edge of the frame, where there had previously been only shadow, there was now part of a shoulder. Dark fabric, unmistakably familiar. I looked down at my own clothes. They matched. I flipped the photo over. There was no writing, no sign of tampering, but the paper in that corner was still warm, as if it had just been developed. I turned slowly toward the camera. It was exactly where I had left it. The lens cap on. No film inside. And in that moment, my legs nearly gave out as the realization settled in. The photographs didn't need to be retaken. They only needed me to remain inside the frame long enough. I was no longer developing images. I was becoming a detail that could be edited. Chapter 9. The dead do not want to be forgotten. I began covering the photographs. Not because I was afraid to look at them, but because I was afraid they were looking at me for too long. I used old newspapers, taped the edges shut, as if blocking my own gaze could stop whatever was happening. It didn't stop. That night, I had the same dream again and again. I was standing in the familiar living room. The family sat motionless on the sofa. No one spoke, no one looked at me. I tried to call out, but no sound came from my throat. Then I heard soft laughter behind me. When I turned around, dozens of people stood packed together in the darkness. Faces I recognized from the photographs. Identical smiles. What woke me in a cold sweat was not their expressions, but the direction of their eyes. They were not looking at me. They were looking through me. The next morning, I found a thin notebook placed in front of the shop door. No envelope, no sign that anyone had left it there. The paper was yellowed, the edges worn, as if it had been opened countless times. It was a diary. The handwriting was unmistakable. Every stroke matched my own, only older, shakier. One sentence appeared repeatedly throughout the pages, written again and again as if the writer were afraid of forgetting it. The dead only truly disappear when no one is looking at them anymore. I kept reading. The writer described how the first photographs hadn't been frightening at all. Just the sensation of being watched. Then came the subtle changes. Then the dreams. And finally, the truth. The things inside the photographs did not want to return to the world of the living. They only wanted to be acknowledged as having existed. Their smiles were not threats. Not mockery. They were the smiles of those who had finally been seen after a very long time. I closed the notebook, my hands numb. I understood then why the man had begged me not to call him back. Why the camera was passed from person to person. Why no one kept it for long. Not because it killed people, but because memory itself was a form of anchoring. Those who saw them would hold them in place. Those who held them would slowly begin to share the same position. I sat alone in the shop, surrounded by photographs sealed beneath layers of paper, and realized something far more terrifying than death itself. I had seen too much. And for the first time, I wondered, from this moment on, was I the one being held? Or the one being kept? Chapter 10. The Room Without Mirrors. I left the photo shop in the middle of the night. I didn't lock the door properly. I didn't clean up. I took only my wallet, my phone, and a single thought with me. I had to disappear from anything that could reflect. I rented a cheap room in the suburbs, one of those places where no one asks too many questions. Where names don't matter. The room was small, the ceiling low, the walls stained a dirty gray. Most importantly, there were no mirrors. I removed the mirror in the bathroom and laid it face down on the floor. I pulled the curtains shut, blocking every window. I even covered the screen of the old television mounted on the wall with black tape. For the first few hours, I could breathe. No smiles. No watching eyes. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, and for the first time in days, I thought I might have escaped. Then my phone vibrated. An image message. No number, no app notification, just a single photograph that filled the screen. I didn't want to open it, but my finger trembled, and I understood something terrifying. I needed to know where I was in this story. The image appeared. It was the room I was in. The angle was from the ceiling, looking down at the mattress where I had been lying. The yellow light, the closed curtains, every detail was exact. I could even see the crease in my shirt. I sat up. In the photograph, I was still lying down. Eyes closed, chest rising and falling, as if asleep. And in the upper left corner of the frame, where the wall met the ceiling, there was something that should not have existed in that room. A reflective surface. I couldn't tell if it was glass, a mirror, or something else entirely. It was incomplete, as though even a small fragment was enough for the other side to look through. Inside that reflection were faces. Unclear, incomplete, but all of them were smiling. I threw the phone to the floor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I backed into the corner of the room, curling in on myself like a child. And then I finally accepted the truth I had been refusing since the beginning. It wasn't mirrors. It wasn't glass. It wasn't the camera. That thing didn't need a reflective surface. It only needed me to exist in the space. I hadn't escaped them. I had only given them a new frame. Chapter 11. When the living become the background. I stopped sleeping. Not because I was afraid of dreams, but because I could no longer be sure when I was awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the room from a different angle, higher, farther away, colder, the perspective of something that did not need to breathe. I picked up my phone. The screen was cracked at one corner, but it still worked. No missed calls, no new messages, as if the photograph had never been sent at all, like it had been meant only for me. Then erased itself from everything else. I opened the front-facing camera. My face appeared on the screen. Pale, dark circles under my eyes. A man who hadn't slept in days. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed the background. Behind me, against the gray wall, there was a patch of darkness deeper than the rest. It had no clear shape, but my eyes refused to look away, like a misspelled word the brain is forced to recognize. I turned around. There was nothing there. I turned back to the screen. In the camera, the dark patch had moved closer. I shut the screen off immediately. A thought surfaced, slow and undeniable. I was no longer the observer. I thought about the family in the photographs, about how they had sat in silence, eyes empty, as if waiting for something to happen behind the lens. I had believed they were passive, dragged into the image against their will. Now I understood. They hadn't been forced. They had stayed still long enough to become background. I turned the camera back on, this time setting the phone on the table, facing me like a fixed lens. I stepped back, standing in the center of the room. On the screen, I saw myself standing there. And behind me were faces. Not reflections. Not shadows. They stood upright, pressed close against my back, layered together like overexposed frames. The people from the shop, the dead family, the man without a shadow. All of them smiling. And what made my breath catch was this. They were no longer looking at me. They were looking over my shoulder. As if I were no more than something blocking the real subject of the frame. I took one step forward. On the screen, I did not move. I remained standing still, face blank, eyes empty, just like the people in the earlier photographs. I understood too late. The longer you remain in an image, the less you remain its subject. You become space for something else to enter. And for the first time, I wondered, if I were to disappear from the frame right now, who would remain in my place? Chapter 12. Not everyone dies immediately. I used to believe the photographs were records of the dead. A kind of visual graveyard, souls trapped because they hadn't yet been released. As terrifying as that idea was, it still carried a strange comfort. If they were already dead, then at least everything was over. But I was wrong. I realized it when I saw a familiar face in the newest image that appeared on my phone. That person was still alive. It was the landlord of the room I was staying in. I clearly remembered his face. His blunt voice when he handed me the key. The faint scar on his chin. In the photograph, he stood in the hallway downstairs, his back turned to the camera. And behind him, pressed against the ceiling shadows, were smiling faces. I checked the timestamp. The photo had been taken 12 minutes earlier. I ran out of the room and down the stairs. The hallway was empty. His door was locked. No sound came from inside. That was when I understood. The photographs didn't capture the dead. They captured those who had been seen. That moment wasn't death. It was the moment someone was marked. I returned to the Photoshop like someone revisiting the scene of his own crime. The camera was still there. For the first time, I picked it up. It was unnaturally heavy. Not because of the metal, but because it felt as though too many things were inside it. I opened the back. There was no film. Yet in the viewfinder, I saw the room, not the darkroom, but the place where I was standing. And within that frame, I saw myself, standing still. Not moving. Not blinking. A sentence formed in my mind, not a voice. Not a thought, but a truth that had always existed. Stay long enough, and everyone will be photographed. The dead were not pulled into the images. The living walked in on their own. Little by little, each time they looked, each time they remembered, each time they tried to confirm that they were still here. And when the photograph was complete, death was nothing more than a formality. I lowered the camera. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from understanding one final thing. I was not the first. And I would certainly not be the last. Chapter 13. The final photograph. I don't remember how long I sat in the darkened Photoshop. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't touch the equipment. I simply sat with my back against the counter. The camera placed in front of me like an offering. Outside, the city continued to function, cars passed. Traffic lights changed. People lived their lives, and that normality made everything feel even more unreal. Whatever was here with me no longer needed the outside world. I closed my eyes. Then I heard the sound of film advancing. Not from my hands. No movement. No mechanical click. Just a faint click, click, echoing inside my head, like a memory being rewound. I opened my eyes. The camera had turned. The lens was pointed directly at me. I took a step back. The camera didn't move, yet the distance between us felt shorter, as if space itself had folded inward. The small display in the viewfinder lit up. Not an image. Just a single word. Smile. I laughed, a dry, hollow sound. I laughed at the absurdity of it all. I laughed because, at last, I understood. The smile was not a request. It was consent. I remembered every face I had seen in the photographs. None of them screamed. None of them struggled. They had only stood there, sat there, looked into the lens, and smiled. Like people who had accepted they no longer belonged on the other side. I raised my hand to my face. My facial muscles felt stiff. Not from fear, but because I realized I had been smiling for some time already. A soft click echoed through the room. Barely audible. Yet in that instant, I felt something leave my chest, not my heart, not my soul, but my sense of existing independently. The room went dark. Not because the power failed, but because I was no longer standing inside it. I was standing inside the frame. And behind me, in the familiar darkness, the faces began to draw closer, without hurry. They knew. This photograph was complete. Chapter 14. The perfect photograph. I no longer perceived time the way I used to. There was no before or after. No night or day. Everything existed as a series of frozen moments, layered on top of one another like photographs overexposed beyond correction. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the darkroom. But I knew I was no longer inside it. I existed as part of the room itself, like the red light, like the chemical scent, like the walls that had witnessed too many things people preferred to forget. On the table, A photograph was being developed. I perceived it from a place that had no physical position, not through eyes. Not through a lens. I simply knew it was there. And that knowledge was enough. The image slowly emerged. A man stood in the center of the darkroom. Familiar clothes. Familiar posture. It was me. Surrounding me were faces. No longer blurred. No longer hiding at the edges of the frame. They were clear and complete. Occupying the space like true subjects. The man without a shadow. The family from the living room. The landlord. And many others I had never met, yet somehow recognized. All of them were smiling. And what told me this photograph was perfect was this. For the first time, I was smiling exactly like them. There was no fear. No resistance. Only the stillness of someone who had found the correct position. I realized then that every photograph before this one had contained a flaw, a subtle emptiness. An invisible space where the viewer still stood outside the frame. But in this image, there was no room left. The frame was full. I was no longer the one looking at photographs. I was the thing, holding the photograph in place. In the corner of the room, the camera lay motionless. It no longer needed anything. Its purpose was complete, just like everyone before me. I felt something close to peace. No more running. No more proving that I existed. Because now, I had been seen forever. And as the photograph was clipped onto the metal line, one final truth became clear. Not every soul wants to move on. Some only want to remain inside a moment that is complete enough. Chapter 15. If you are looking at this photograph, this file was compiled from what remained inside a photolab that was permanently closed in a suburban district. There was no official missing person report. No body was ever recovered. Only an abandoned space, where the smell of chemicals still lingered in the air. As if someone had only just stepped away without turning off the lights. When the cleanup crew entered the shop, they found no rolls of film, no camera, no signs of struggle or forced entry. Everything was disturbingly orderly. There was only one photograph hanging from the metal line in the darkroom. It had no label, no date, no signature. In the photograph stood a man in the center of the darkroom. His expression was calm. His lips were curved into a faint smile, neither happy nor sad. Around him were many other faces, dimmer, layered together like overlapping memories. What no one could explain was the sensation that followed for those who stood in front of the photograph for too long. Every witness described the same feeling. They felt as though they were no longer standing where they had been. As if the space behind them had quietly traded places with the space inside the image. One worker involved in the cleanup later wrote in an unofficial report. Sometimes I thought the man in the photograph was completely still. But at other times, I was certain. He was looking back at me. The photograph has since disappeared. No one remembers exactly who took it down. No security camera recorded the moment. All that is known is this. After that day, whenever someone tried to describe the man's face, the first detail they always remembered was the same. The smile. If you have read this far, you may be looking at a phone screen, a computer monitor, or a printed page. You may believe this is only a story. But ask yourself one simple question. When was the last time you noticed your own reflection? And if, at this very moment, at the edge of the screen, you feel as though something is smiling back at you, please don't stand still for too long. Because sometimes, being seen just once is enough to become part of the next photograph. Photographs don't move. They don't breathe. They don't watch. But if you've made it to the end of this story, and you feel like something is looking back at you from the dark edge of the screen, don't worry. It's probably just your imagination. Probably.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.